Excellent. All right, all right, all right. Eric, are you ready? All righty. I'll up in a word of prayer, and then we'll get going. Father, thank you for this evening, time to spend in your word, time to spend just continuing to progress through the book of Psalms. Thank you for people here. Thank you for those watching online. Bless their reading and meditation on your word. And just guide us as we walk through this altar today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. So we're picking up where we left off in the middle of Book 2. What Psalms consist Book 2? (42 to 72). Yep. What consists of Book 4? (90 to 106). Book 1, 1 to 41. Book 5, 107 to 150. And then Book 3. It is short. Book 3 and 4 are the shortest. 73 to 89. Book 3 and Book 4 are the shortest of the two, both consisting of 17 Psalms. There are 5 major characters in the book of Psalms. Who are they? The Messiah, the wicked, the righteous, the kings of the earth, the kings of the nations. Yahweh. The 5 books also seem to function as 5 acts within a narrative, within narrative theory. Act 1 consists of what? It's the introduction, correct. The introduction of your main characters and the conflict. Act 2 within the narrative. The escalation of the conflict, which we are beginning to see in Book 2. Act 3. Climax in Book 3 will illustrate that climax in Psalm 73 through 89, which is the tragic climax because the reading of Book 3 very much seems to indicate the failure of the Davidic covenant, that the wicked prosper, the kingdom's divided. So it's a tragic climax. Act 4 within narrative constructs the de-escalation. Yes, correct. The de-escalation, it's that period like that. The de-escalation, right, things begin to kind of calm down. And Book 4 will do that as it calms us down by focusing primarily on the fact that Yahweh reigns. And so that's where you see a lot of those Psalms, the Lord reigns. Psalms, particularly 96 to 99. And then after reorienting our mind on Yahweh's sovereignty and his kingship, only then does it reintroduce David as king in 101 to 103. We'll get there when we get to Book 4. And then Act 5 within the narrative structure is resolution, yes. All right, so when we look at structure, when we're looking at groupings of Psalms, what is our first tool to see structure? Again, Book 1 is the hardest one to see this tool, but the primary tool to see structure within the books would be the author, would be authorship, would be those headings. It's a little harder to see that in Book 1 because David is your primary, if not your exclusive author. Outside of, I think there are only 4 Psalms, I believe, off the top of my head, and I could be wrong about that. There are only a few, 4 maybe, that don't have explicit references to David as author. Psalm 10, for example, but we assume Psalm 10 was originally part of Psalm 9 as the 2 Psalms form an acrostic. So it's a little harder in Book 1 to see the subdivisions with that, but they are still helpful. That kind of formed a lot of our structure when we went through it. We begin to see in Book 2 the significance of authorship, right? So 42 through 49 are all written by the sons of Korah. Again, 43, similar to Psalm 10, We assume it was originally part of Psalm 72 at one point in time and then broke into its own psalm because of the similar themes in the repeated verse, particularly the chorus kind of verse of hope in God and why are you downcast, O my soul, hope in God, and I will again praise him. Because we see that repeated twice in 42 and once in 43. But the rest of them, 42, 44 through 49, are all written by the sons of Korah. Psalm 50 is your solo Asaph psalm within Book 2. And then you have David from 51 onward, 72 written by Solomon. I think there might be one in there, maybe like Psalm 70 or 71, where it doesn't have explicit Davidic reference, but the vast majority. There's no other author referenced from 51 through 71. So we see that as a group. And so 50 does seem to play a significant role within the structure because it's the only psalm written by Asaph. And so when you look at that and that transition between the sons of Korah and Asaph, you have someone that has just highlighted, I can't remember who, the similar themes, the connections, the parallels, the correspondence between 49 and 52, as it seems to be kind of bridging that change in authorship. And you kind of went through that last week. I just have it on the screen. What's playing out there from 49 through 52? Because 49, we see man's insignificant reality, that whatever he does doesn't matter because at the end of the day, he dies and goes to Sheol, and you never see a U-Haul, a hearse carrying a U-Haul, right? Nothing at the end of the day follows him to the grave. In Psalm 50, God's intense rebuke, because then he steps on the scene and provides that judgment. It's kind of relating to man's insignificant reality. And then the intimate repentance of the righteous. We see correspondence there with the sacrifice of thanksgiving laid out in Psalm 50, and then the importance of the proper sacrifices, the broken and contrite heart of Psalm 51, and then we see the insolent response of the wicked in Psalm 52 as Doeg takes on that role as an Edomite on behalf of the nations. And really that's the one kind of being spoken of in regards to the one who will be 52:7, the man who would not set God as his strength, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and was strong in his destruction. So as we continue through Book 2, the biblical theology of Book 2, Book 2 reveals the Lord remains in sovereign control of Israel's dynasty throughout the conflict between belief and reality. That was 42 through 48, especially that conflict beginning in 42 through 44, that despair, because as highlighted in 44, the conflict really between belief and reality, right? If we had broken the covenant, if we had done these things, we understand why we're losing. So we see that expressed. We see that great example of just an open and unafraid prayer in Psalm 44. But we see that progression, and again, that's the idea, that's the application of this concept of reading the book of Psalms as a group, and the application of reading it as a book that has purposeful structure is the application is that we read chunks, groups of Psalms as a whole, and we don't just cherry pick. But when you grow from 42 through 48, from despair, when you go from the depths of despair to doxology in 48, right? And when we meditate on the whole thing, not just when someone's in that state of despair. We don't just throw out, why are you downcast? Just hope in God and you'll be good. Again, that's a starting point, but if that's the extent of your counseling, then you're a terrible counselor. It's true, it's just you need more. Well, even something like, Philippians 1:27 has been grace gifted to you not only to believe but to suffer for his name's sake. nice, but if that's the first thing you pull out when someone's going through suffering, like, not helpful. That's something they can look back at later, but sometimes in the depth of it, that's not what they need. And understanding, and yes, the scripture is sharper than two-edged sword, cutting between bone and marrow. But applying it, having that wisdom to apply and to do that surgery in not only our own life, but in lives around us, that takes practice and knowing what scriptures to use when. And knowing, yes, sometimes you just got to shut up and listen. But that process, that progress from 42 through 48, when we take it as a whole group and see a purposeful flow and structure, the application of the thesis kind of that we're going through and seeing structure to the whole book means that we grow from despair to doxology. But we do that by meditating on 42 through 48. Just like when we're in that state of worry, we can take 25 through 37, where we saw all those references to wait upon the Lord. Right? If you want to go from worry to waiting, like meditate on 25 through 37 as a group, not just cherry picking different psalms to meditate on, but growing through the compiler's purposeful and I think inspired ordering of the book of Psalms, right? Because it's not like 150 psalms just randomly appeared in this order. And you see that with different groupings, that there does seem to be purposeful flow and connection between psalms. One of those examples, there's some small examples, but one of the bigger examples in terms of bigger structure that we saw, 23, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Is it more than mere coincidence that 24 is then a progression into the house? And then you see all those references to dwelling in the house in 25 through 30 and 31, I think, and even Psalm 30 is a song written for the dedication of the house. So it's like, is it more than, if this is happen chance that these psalms got in the order, then it's a great quote. I believe in coincidences. Coincidences happen every day. I just don't trust coincidences. Garrick's not a great person to quote, though, so don't. All right, so the biblical theology, getting back to the biblical theology, throughout reveals the Lord remaining in sovereign control of Israel's dynasty throughout the conflict between belief and reality, which requires a confession of his sovereignty, right, and that was pointed out in man's insignificant reality and God's intense rebuke, resulting in a confidence in his presence even while experiencing his absence, which is probably where we'll end up camping most of the day. Hopefully we finish book 2 today, because we only have a few more weeks left and we're not done with book 2. So we got to get moving. By we, I mean I. Resulting in the confidence in his presence even while experiencing his absence. We'll get into what that means. Fully realizing that all things will culminate in God's administration of justice for his king and his kingdom. So 53 through 68, I get all primarily Davidic psalms. First, this concept of God's absence and his presence. While you experience the perception of God's absence, you need to have confidence in the Lord's presence. And we see this in this psalm. Particularly, what do I mean by God's absence? There is, within these Psalms 53, especially through 53 through 63, as we go through them, there's the implied absence of God because of the presence of David's plight, the presence of David's enemies. Because of their presence, there's the implication on a narrative construct that God is absent. Because in that sense, like if he's there, why are his problems there? Again, as a character in terms of narrative ideas. But we're going to see that while we experience the perception of God's absence, you need to have confidence in the Lord's presence. Right, so within this collection, right, God's absence is seen in the presence of David's enemies. Right, so Psalm 52, Doeg has killed those who helped David. He's killed Ahimelech, and 85 total there at Nob. In Psalm 53, evildoers have encompassed and consumed God's people like bread in 53:4. The Zephonite strangers rose up against David, causing him trouble in 54:3 and 7. Strangers have risen up against me, and ruthless men have sought my life. They have not set God before them. Verse 7, for he has delivered me from all the distress, and my eye has looked in triumph upon my enemies. And his enemies are before him. In Psalm 55, a close friend has betrayed him. 12 and 13, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it, nor is it the one who hates me, who has magnified himself against me, then I could hide myself from him. But it is you, a man my equal, my close companion, and my familiar friend. Right, so it's not an enemy, it's someone who's been close to him, someone who's had fellowship with him, someone who's his equal that has betrayed him. In Psalm 55, and sometimes those friendships, whether they really have or even whether it's perceived within our own mind, those betrayals can often cut deeper than an enemy. The Philistines in Psalm 56, the Philistines trampled David, they twisted his words, they stirred up strife for David, and they watched his every step. In Psalm 57, Saul, David's own father-in-law, was bearing down on him and surrounding him there in the cave. 58, the wicked and the unjust leaders were before him. Psalm 59, Saul's sinful and evil, wicked henchmen surround him like a snarling and prowling dogs, and they ridicule him. Psalm 60, enemies from a distant country, from different countries, were at hand with bows and arrows. We see this in Psalm 60, verse 4. All right, so within these chapters, we see the, in a sense, if I don't say the implied absence, I mean the implied absence, because again, we're circling back on the theological concept, but just looking at it from a character perspective, right? He's not there because the enemy is there, from the human perspective and from the narrative idea. Right, God's absence is seen in David's prayers. Right, save me, 54. Hear my prayer. Listen to my prayer. Pay attention to me. Answer me. Rescue me. Look. Right, wake up. Right, wake to help me and take notice. Hey, look over here. I'm like, what are you doing? Right, these are not prayer requests that you have with someone next to you. It's like, hey, you're trying to get someone's attention. And so again, the implied absence of God. Hear my cry. Pay attention to my prayer. Hear my voice when I am in anguish, right? Where really all of these, the prayer requests, the presence of the enemies, really coming back to the question, like, where is God? Like, where is he when I need him most? And so within these Psalms, we see a twofold answer to that question, right? So first, within this group of Psalms, we're going to see the first answer, where is God when I need him most? First and foremost, he is high and lifted up. Like, he is God. He is in heaven. Right, Psalm 53:2, God looks down from heaven. And that's where he is again, as a character within the narrative idea, on the human race to see if there is one who is wise, one who seeks, God. 55:19, God, the one enthroned from long ago, right? He's high and lifted up. He's on his throne. I'm taking that high and lifted up from Isaiah 6. Psalm 57, verse 2, I call to God Most High, right? He's El Elyon, the one above all the rest. Psalm 60, verse 6, God has spoken in his sanctuary, right? That's where he is residing. 61:4, I will dwell in your tent, right? In a sense, that's where he dwells. And I will take refuge under the shelter of your wings. 62:11 and 12, God has spoken once. I have heard this twice. Strength belongs to God. Faithful love, that hesed, belongs to you, Lord. For you repay each according to his works. 53:2, so I gaze on you in the sanctuary to see your strength and your glory. All right, where is God when I need him most? He is high and lifted up. He's in his sanctuary. He's still Elyon, the Most High. He's still the one over all of it. He's still enthroned. He's still the one enthroned from long ago. He still has sovereign control over it all. Where is God when I need him most? He's high and lifted up. He's in control. So that's the first answer that we see within this group of Psalms. Where is God when I need him most? He's high and lifted up. He's above me. He's over there, but he's in control of everything. But then within this group of Psalms, we also have a second answer. Where is God when I need him most? And the second answer within this group of Psalms is he is right next to you. God is with you. He is near you, and he is for you. Right, 54 verse 4, God is my helper, the sustainer of my life. In Psalm 55, verse 16, 17, and 22, but I call to God, and the Lord will save me. I complain and groan morning, noon, and night, and he hears my voice. Right, cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to be shaken. Right, the fact that he hears morning, noon, and night all the time. I love that verse in 56:8. You yourself have recorded my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? 59:10 and 16. My faithful God will come to meet me. Again, that intimacy concept. God will let me look down upon my adversaries, but I will sing of your strength and will joyfully proclaim your faithful your love, your hesed in the morning. I think these are the Christian Standard Version Bible translation. For you have been a stronghold for me, a refuge in my day of trouble. 61:2 and 3. I call to you from the ends of the earth when my heart is without strength. Lead me to a rock that is high above me. You have been a refuge for me, a strong tower in the face of the enemy. 63:6-8. When I think of you as I lie on my bed, I meditate on you during the night watches because you are my helper. I will rejoice in the shadow of your wings. I will follow close to you. Your right hand holds on to me. Again, those intimacy concepts, that he's the helper, he's the refuge. But beyond that, right, he's the intimacy of put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? The intimacy concept in 63, your right hand holds on to me. Right, so where is God when I need him most? He's with me. He's intimately connected with me. Right? He's not so sovereign, he's not so high and lifted up that he's not connected or caring about what we're going through. But he's not so close and intimately with us that he doesn't have control over everything. So it's the dual realities, but both of them hand in hand. Again, I love 56. 8, put my tears in your bottle. I know no one will get this imagery, but I love this picture. Just that picture of the bottle, the flask, the eye. Just how close you have to be for that concept. So I always think of that when I read Psalm 56. All right, again, so where is God when I need him most? First, he is high and lifted up. He's in heaven. He's sovereign. He's in control. Second, he is right next to you. God is with you. He's near you, and he's for you. All right, on the one hand, God is not so with us that he does not have control over all things. And on the other hand, God is not so sovereign, not so transcendent, not so high and lifted up that he's not intimately aware and intimate of what we are going through and uncaring about what we are going through. And you see even his care at different spots. Genesis 6, particularly with man's sin, Genesis 6, he's grieved. You see he's grieved over Saul being king in 1 Samuel, blanking on the chapter, I want to say 13. But I love this. It's a quote from somebody, I don't remember who said it. Confidence in God's presence supersedes the experience of his absence. That even when we're going through and we're experiencing, even again, our perception of the absence of God, because the fact is he's never absent because he's omnipresent. But the perceived experience of God's absence. Right? Confidence in God's presence needs to supersede that experience of his absence. We have a song coming up. I just gotta look it up real quick. It's been a while since I've sung this song. It's a good song, though. I mean, not that I would sing a bad song.
Jesus, you are near. The peace of God surrounding me, and casting out all fear. The hand that holds the heavens is the mighty hand that saves. The voice that calms the stormy seas is calling me by name. I'm singing the victory of the cross, and resting in the shadow of your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of your life, 'cause I am yours forever, and Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. When I have forgotten the fullness of your grace, yes, I remember Calvary, where you took my place. I'm singing the victory of the cross, resting in the shadow of your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of your life, 'cause I am yours forever, and Jesus, you are mine. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. Yes. Oh, Jesus, you are mine. There is no one like you, God. Love immeasurable and strong. And there is no one like you, God. So lead this heart to sing in awe. There is no one like you, God. Oh, love immeasurable and strong. There is no one like you, God. So lead this heart to sing in the victory of the cross, resting in the shadow of your redeeming love. I'm standing on the promise of your life, 'cause I'm yours forever,
has some of those themes from this section. And so, resulting in a confidence in his presence, even while experiencing his absence. We'll see this in 53 through 68. So while you experience the perception of God's absence, you need to have confidence in the Lord's presence by first having conviction of God's justice and God's mercy. We see this in 53 through 60. These are particularly in two groups. 53 through 55 are maskils, and 56 through 60 are miktoms. Again, I don't know what those mean, but no one does. The meaning of maskil and miktam has been lost to time. Again, you can speculate. I'm sure someone does. But in Psalm 53, you see God as your avenger, or the one who takes action on behalf of his people, because there we see in Psalm 53 that the people are being consumed like bread. But God scatters the bones of him who encamped against his people. Psalm 54, God is your sustainer, the one who is the helper. Psalm 54, verse 4, behold, God is my helper. The Lord is among those who sustain my soul. He will return evil to my foes, destroy them in your truth. Psalm 55, he's the rescuer, the one who comes and provides that rescue on behalf of David. In Psalm 56, he's the caretaker. We see that, especially in Psalm 56. 8, you have taken account of my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? In God, whose word I praise, in Yahweh, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? He's the one who's providing that and taking care of David. In Psalm 57, God is your loyal one. Again, this emphasis on his hesed. We see that at the opening and the closing of the Psalm 57, verse 3. He will send from heaven and save me. He reproaches him who tramples upon me. God will send his loving kindness and his truth. Right? He will send that hesed. He's going to act out of that relationship that he has with him. Verse 10, for your hesed is great to the heavens and your truth is to the skies. Right? That loyal love, that one who's going to take action on account of another. 58, he's the rewarder, the one who provides that. Verse 11, then man will say, surely there is a reward for the righteous. Surely there is a God who judges on the earth. And of course, there are similar themes. These aren't exclusive. It's not like that psalm only talks about the Lord as the punisher and the other ones don't. Like these themes do overlap. I'm just highlighting one just to create a list. 59, right? He's the punisher. He's the one who's going to deliver David, but in so doing, he's going to punish all the nations. In verse 5. He's going to punish those who've come against his people. In Psalm 60, he's going to provide that help. Right, so we have, well, you experience the perception of God's absence. You need to have confidence in the Lord's presence. We do this by having conviction of God's justice and mercy. We saw in 53 through 60. And then by crying out for God's refuge. Right, so in these 4 Psalms, David provides 4 actions to take in order to rest in God's refuge in the midst of the conflict. Psalms 61 through 64 present a battle. If we read them together, 61 describes the opening attack of the enemy. 62 records the enemy's decisive and destructive attack. 63 proclaims the reversal of the situation, and 63 will depict the prophetic destruction of David's enemies. He's going to come on the scene and provide that destruction. So as such, in terms of crying out for God's refuge that takes place in this 4-psalm battle scene, Psalm 61, right, pray for the strength to serve him, right, within this opening attack of the enemy, we see the prayer to continue to serve. Right, to rest in that strong tower. 62, pouring out our heart before him. Again, one of those just good examples of open and unafraid prayer and trust in the Lord. 63, praising him for his loyal love, that emphasis on his hesed there again. And 64, pondering God's work in your life. And so 61 through 64 seem to, if you read them together, describe this battle, which then appropriately leads into 65 through 68, which then we see celebrating God's victory. Right, to you, verse 1 of 65, to you there will be silence and praise in Zion, O God, and to you the vow will be paid. O you who hear prayer, to you all flesh comes. Right, but this opening, the praise will take place. By fearsome deeds you answer us in righteousness, because he has taken action, because he's visited the earth. There's requirement to praise him. 13, the meadows are clothed with flocks, the valleys are covered with grain, and they make a loud shout, indeed they sing. And again, this singing concept continues into 66. They make a loud shout to God, all the earth. Sing praise and glory of his name. The blessing, bless our God, verse 8. O people, come, verse 16, come and hear, all you who fear. Blessed be God, verse 20. And this continuation of celebrating his victory. Oh, I actually have more blanks to fill in. Right, so in terms of celebrating his victory in 65 through 68. 65, we rejoice that he satisfies us. In 66, we rejoice that he brings us through trials. 67, rejoice because he blesses us. 68, rejoice because that he bears our burdens. Right, in Psalm 68, we see the procession idea. I love that picture of, where is it? No, verse 15. Bashan is another name for Zion. So, verse 15, the mountain of God is the mountain of Zion, or mountain of Bashan, and the mountain peaks. A mountain of many peaks is the mountain of Bashan. Why do you look with envy, O mountains with many peaks, at the mountain which God has prized for his habitation? Surely Yahweh will dwell there forever. Again, this idea that the other mountains look at Zion with envy. Again, there's nothing that spectacular about Zion. It's not like Everest or that one in Flagstaff, Arizona, where it's like, oh, that's a mountain. Like, that's really pretty. Like, and it snows and it looks all nice and you take pictures of it and all that. Zion's, you don't do that. So it's like, it's this beautiful picture, again, connecting to Psalm 132, where it's like that he's elected Zion. It's like that the other mountains look at Zion with envy, like personifying them. It's like, what's Zion got that God likes it so much? Like, what's so special about you? Like, you're not even that pretty. No one does a catalog of mountains. Like, on your mountain calendar of mountains, like the 12 best mountains, Zion's not one of them. so they all look at this, but it's that great idea. And but we, even within the psalm, this idea that God is bearing our burdens, that he's doing this on behalf of, he's acting on behalf of his people. I love that verse 19, blessed be the Lord who daily bears our burden. And he's constantly caring for us. And I think that's why Paul can change the quotation of 18, verse 18. You have ascended on high, you led your captives, and you received gifts among men, even among the rebellious also, that Yah, God, may dwell there. Because Paul will change that quotation to, you gave gifts to men, in Ephesians verse 4, when he's talking about the gifting of the Holy Spirit and the spiritual gifts. But he quotes this 68 verse 18, but he changes it to he gives gifts to men. But that's still within the meaning of the chapter of 68, because he's doing these things when you read the whole chapter. He's establishing his kingdom, and that results in the benefit and the blessing of his people, because he's daily bearing their burdens. So he's not changing the concept. And then Paul is also not changing the imagery of the victory procession. You bring in those you've conquered, and you receive gifts from those you've conquered, but then you would distribute that spoil to your own people. So when Paul changes that quotation, he's not changing the meaning of what's going on. He's not changing the picture, the idea of that victory procession either. Just a side comment about if you've ever noticed that Paul changes the quotation of Psalm 68, verse 18, when he quotes it in Ephesians 4:3, whatever verse that is in Ephesians 4. Don't remember off the top of my head. Questions, comments, concerns, screams of outrage as I look up the next song? No. David's life was not. Mm-hmm. That's why, again, like, I almost prefer David. Again, a lot of New Testament people love Paul. Paul's great, but sometimes Paul's like too ideal. It's like, what you struggle with, Paul? I mean, we know he had his struggles, but it's just like we see the full range of the human experience, I think, through David and through the Psalms in particular. Like, he went through a lot. Okay, that's where it is. I was like, where is this song? I thought I had it on my phone, so I didn't have to look it up. I know where it is.
Still Son to free us, holds me in his love. Sing with joy now, our God is for us. The Father's love is a strong and mighty fortress. Raise your voice now, our love is greater. Who can stand against us if our God is for us? Sing with joy now, our God is for us. The Father's love is a strong and mighty fortress. Raise your voice now, our God is for us. Stand against us if our God is for us.
It's a good song that just kind of reflects some of those themes that were from 52 through 68 in that Davidic collection, right? That he's that fortress, that emphasis on his love, that hesed that we saw come up, that victory, praise that he's for us, 68, and that celebration from 65 through 68 in particular. And then lastly, we see the culmination of God's kingdom plan in 69 through 72. Okay, so 69 and 72 summarize many of the themes that were previously expounded upon through Book 2. 70 says in short what 69 says in length. And remember in 69 we see that reference to David's suffering, again as that suffering servant idea, really because we're escalating that conflict in Book 2. So kind of in Book 1, again, David was the primary author. We didn't have a specific reference to his conflict, whereas in Book 2, we see the oppression. We see that conflict between belief and reality in 44. We see all the enemies that was listed out between 52 and 60. So again, it's that escalation of the conflict. Book 2 is Act 2. It's escalating that conflict, and we're getting more faces to the enemy than what we had in Book 1. So do you see why I'm calling it the escalation of the conflict? Like we're seeing more friction going on. 71 sounds like an old man reminiscing. Perhaps David wrote it later in his life. 72, it's by Solomon. You see this in the title, but I still think it's kind of written by David with him, because we see at the end of the book, at the end of the psalm as well, Psalm 72, verse 20, the prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are completed. So maybe him and David wrote 72 kind of together at the beginning of his reign, kind of looking forward to his reign, hoping that that picture of the Messiah, even again, David knows it's for the distant future, as we see in 2 Samuel 7, it's still hoping that that kingdom is manifested in Solomon's reign. But it's going to come about. Right, so we see Book 2 reveals the Lord remaining in sovereign control of Israel's dynasty through the conflict between belief and reality, 62 through 48, and that what's going on there, which requires a confession of his sovereignty, that he has administrative authority over everyone. The Psalm 50 in particular, that Psalm of Asaph, is really that turning point there, resulting in a confidence in his presence even while experiencing his absence, resulting in the culmination of his administration of justice for his king and his kingdom. And again, I started talking about Book 2. I used the phrase, "We shall have spring again," which of course comes from the Chronicles of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Right. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. When he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. Right, so it's looking forward to that culmination of justice, ultimately in Psalm 72, even though that conflict between belief and reality that we saw in 42 through 44 in particular, but extending the increased escalation of the conflict that's going on, there's still that hope in Psalm 72 that we will have spring again. So I like just taking that, right? Wrong will be right when Jesus comes in sight, taking it and using it, turning some of Mr. Reaper's words to apply to Christ, not Aslan. Wrong will be right when Jesus comes to sight. At the sound of his trumpets roar, sorrows will be no more. When he rules the earth, winter meets its death. When he begins to reign, we shall have spring again. looking forward to um, the coming kingdom of Psalm 72. All right. And then book 3. Right. So book 2 is we shall have spring. Like the hope is we're going to have spring again, that the kingdom is going to come. And book 3, winter has come again. So we'll, kind of like today. So we'll take 10 minutes and come back at 8:05 or a little somewhere around there. I have no idea who your parents are. I don't know if I think they look young or you look old. I don't know.
Yeah, Pastor Sam asked me about that. Do you have a sister or something? And I was like, how do you spell the last name? And he said that. I was like, that's the English spelling, but
Is it someone related to you?
All right.
not that I'm aware of, but
What would be the chances, right?
right.
Wow.
All right. So getting back to book 3, right? Book 3. Remember, consisting of 73 through 89, 17 Psalms. Book 3 and 4 are the shortest of the two, being a total of 17 Psalms each. Book 3 is going to be our tragic climax because it looks like the Davidic kingdom has failed. That everything's gone to Sheol. So winter has come. Right, so book 3 seems to have been compiled during the period of the divided kingdom because the perceived failure of the Davidic covenant, particularly when we get to 89. Right, there are certain psalms that kind of indicate when something had to be compiled, like book 3, it has to be compiled after 89 because of what we call it's part of the compilation, and it seems that the Davidic covenant has failed, that Jerusalem has been under siege, so sometime during the divided kingdom, I guess, would be later into the divided kingdom. Something like book 5 has, what psalm is it, 139, which references the exile in Babylon, so you know book 5 was not compiled until after Babylon. Book 2, because you have 4 Solomon and the nature of that prayer, does seem that it's compiled later into David's reign. So I think David compiles book 1 and 2 sometime before his death there in approximately, is it 990 or something like that? I could be wrong. David's somewhere around like the 1,000 year before Christ. His 40 years is somewhere around there. Just can't remember the specific date. So then, sometime during the divided period, remember the southern kingdom will fall in 586. So I think you have book 1 and 2 compiled, and then like 200 years later, you have book 3 compiled as an addendum, as a kind of a continuation, because you see that explicit statement in 72:20 that the prayers of David are ended. So book 3 represents every time when the world and its violence make no sense, times when we do not understand why God does not simply fix it. Book 3 is a poetic rendering of theodicy and its themes, as well as today as they did in ancient times. Theodicy being the problem of evil. The problem of evil, the existence of evil. Like, why does God allow evil to exist? So it's a poetic rendering of that problem, the existence of evil. Like, why does God, again, allow it to exist? Again, it's the tragic climax because everything seems to go downhill. It seems that the Davidic covenant has failed. That reminds me of what Samwise says. If you're a Lord of the Rings person. Oh, that's really small. I can't read that. It's like in the great, because I think it's Sam who says this to Frodo, right? It's in the great stories, Mr. Frodo, the ones that really mattered, full of darkness and danger they were, and sometimes you didn't want to know the end, because how could the end be happy? How could the world go back to the way it was when so much bad had happened? But in the end, it's only a passing thing, the shadow. Even darkness must pass. And that's very much where we find ourselves in book 3. Again, book 3 is kind of also where we live, I think, in our own time, because it seems that the Davidic covenant and the covenants have failed, and that the wicked prosper. All right, so book 3 reveals the Lord remaining in sovereign control of Israel and the nations, even in light of the perceived prosperity of the wicked and the failure of the Davidic covenant. We're going to see this in Psalm 73 through 83. all laid out there. So when it comes to what's our main tool for looking at subgroups, particularly books 3 through 4, well, 3 through 5. We're primarily looking at title, like the title, the psalm titles, the authorship. That's kind of our tool for finding groups and subgroups of psalms. So in book 3, just flipping through real quick, 73 through 83 are all written by Asaph. 84 to 89, you're going to have more of a Sons of Korah influence. 84, 85. 86, you have a prayer of David. Again, I think it's specifically purposely a prayer because 72, verse 20 said the prayers of David are ended. Because again, I think this is compiled 200-300 years after books 1 and 2. And then we have a return to the Sons of Korah in 87. And then you have one written by Haman the Ezraite in 88. And then Ethan the Ezraite in 89. So it's kind of, but our major division is between Asaph and then the other ones. So the 11 Asaph and then the 7 non-Asaph. So this 73 through 83 is very much a reflection of the Asaphite Psalms. So the book 3 reveals the Lord remaining in sovereign control of Israel and the nations, even in light of the perceived prosperity of the wicked and the failure of the Davidic covenant. So first we're going to see in 73 through 77 the prosperity of the wicked and the proud individuals, more of an emphasis on the individuals, whereas 79 through 83 will be more of an emphasis on the nations. So this was a particular structure. I don't remember. I'd have to, was it Kunkel? Not Kunkel. I can see the commentary. I can see the book, but I can't remember the author. I'd have to look it up in there. Who saw this structure? That you have 73 through 74 being an individual lament, and then 75 being a divine oracle, 76 being a divine intervention, and 77 being a prayer. And I'll flip through real quick on the slides, but it's in your notes, that you see that same pattern emerge on the back 5 of the Asaphite Psalms in 79 through 83. You have that same pattern: individual lament, divine oracle, divine intervention, and prayer. And that was big in terms of just seeing structure to the Asaphite section, that you have these two corresponding sections laid out the same, similar themes. And again, your notes, you can see those two probably a little better than me flipping back and forth. So the individual laments, they're going to question about what God is doing. Right? Particularly, you see 73, verse 11. They say, "How does God know? Is there knowledge with the Most High?" And then 74, verse 10, we see that another question: "How long, O God, will the adversary reproach? Will the enemy spurn your name forever? Why do you turn back your hand, even your right hand?" 75 will be a divine oracle. Provides the oracle of God. In response, we see his response in 75, 2 through 5, as we see him speak. "For I select an appointed time, for it is I who judge with equity. The earth and all who dwell in it melt. It is I who have firmly set its pillars. I said to the boastful, do not boast, and to the wicked, do not raise up the horn. Do not raise up your horn on high, nor speak with insolence, or with pride, with insolent pride." Verse 10, again, he talks that I will deliver it forever. I will, about cutting off, I will cut it off. And then 76, God's divine intervention, where we see him actually step on, right, he's known in Judah. His name is great in Israel. So is his tabernacle in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. He has broken the flaming arrows, the shield, and the sword. Right? He actually steps on the scene and takes that action to break those things. Both chariot and rider and horse slumbered into a deep sleep. But you are fearsome, and you stand in your presence. Who can stand in your presence when once you are angry? Right, and then we see a prayer in 77. So within this, we see the focus. Once you see the corresponding of those two groups, 73 through 77 and 79 through 83, how they're both the individual, the oracle, the intervention, and the prayer. It highlights the importance, not just numerically because you have 11 and 78 is the middle, but 78 very much does function, I think, as the middle of the Asaphite Psalms, but I think it really actually functions as the focal point to the entire Psalter as a whole. Right, the lesson from Israel's history. Psalm 78, a maskil of Asaph. Give ear, O my people, to my instruction. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will pour forth dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have recounted to us. We will not conceal them from our children, but recount to the generation to come the praises of Yahweh, and his strength and his wondrous deeds that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and set a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers that they should teach them to their children, that the generation to come might know, even the generation yet to be born, that they may rise and recount them to their children, that they should set their confidence in God and not forget the deeds of God, but observe his commandments and not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not prepare its heart and whose spirit was not faithful to God. Yeah, that's Israel's history that they're supposed to learn from, particularly that generation that came out of Egypt, a stubborn and rebellious generation. They're constantly supposed to learn from that generation. Verse 9, the sons of Ephraim were archers equipped with bows. Yet they turned back in the day of battle. They did not keep the covenant of God and refused to walk in his law. So they forgot his acts and his wondrous deeds that he had shown them. He did wonders before their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the field of Zoan. He split the sea and caused them to pass through, and he made the waters stand up like a heap. Then he led them with the cloud by day, and all the night with a light of fire. He was splitting the rocks in the wilderness, and so gave them abundant drink like the ocean depths. He brought forth streams also from the cleft face, and caused waters to run down like rivers. Yet they still continued to sin against him, to rebel against the Most High in the desert, and in their heart they put God to the test by asking for food according to their desire. Then they spoke against God. They said, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rock so that waters gushed out, and streams were overflowing. Can he give bread also? Will he prepare meat for his people?" Right? Despite all that they had seen, as soon as they're out of Egypt, it's where's the food, where's the bread? Right? Therefore Yahweh heard and was full of wrath. And a fire, verse 21, and a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also mounted against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation. Yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna upon them to eat and gave them the grain from heaven. Man ate the bread of angels. He set them provision to satisfy. He led forth the east wind in the heavens, and by his strength he guided the south wind. And then he rained meat upon them like the dust, even the winged fowl like the sand of the seas. He caused them to fall in the midst of the camp, all around his dwelling places. So they ate and were satisfied, and their desire he brought to them. Before they had satisfied their desire, while their food was in their mouths, the anger of God rose up against them and killed some of their stoutest ones and subdued the choice men of Israel. In spite of all this, they still sinned and did not believe in his wondrous deeds. So he brought their days to an end in futility and their years in sudden terror. When he killed them, then they sought him and returned and sought earnestly for God. And they remembered that God was their rock, the Most High God, their Redeemer. But they deceived him with their mouth, and they lied to him with their tongue, for their heart was not prepared to remain with him, nor were they faithful to his covenant. But he, being compassionate, atoned for their iniquity and did not destroy them. And he abandoned in turning back his anger, and did not arouse all his wrath. Thus he remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that goes and does not return. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness, and grieved him in the wasteland. Again and again they tested God, and pained the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power, the day when he redeemed them from the adversary, when he performed his signs in Egypt and his miracles in the field of Zoan, and turned their rivers to blood, and their streams they could not drink. He sent among them swarms of flies which devoured them, frogs which destroyed them, and gave also their crops to the grasshopper, and the fruit of their labor to the locust. He killed their vines with hailstones, and their sycamore trees with frost. He gave over their cattle also to the hailstones, and their herds to bolts of lightning. He sent upon them his burning anger and fury and indignation and distress, a band of destroying angels. He leveled a path for his anger. He did not hold back their soul from death, but gave over their life to the plague. So he struck all the firstborn in Egypt, and the first of their vigor in the tents of Ham. But he led forth his people like sheep, and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them safely, so they did not fear, but the sea covered their enemies. So he brought them to his holy land, to his hill country, which was his right hand had acquired. He also drove out the nations before them, and apportioned them for an inheritance by measurement, and made the tribes of Israel dwell in their tents. Yet, verse 56, yet they tested and rebelled against the Most High God, and did not keep his testimonies, but turned back and acted treacherously like their fathers. They turned aside like a treacherous bow. And they provoked him with their high places and roused his jealousy with graven images. God heard and was filled with wrath and greatly rejected Israel. So he abandoned the dwelling place at Shiloh, the tent which he caused to dwell among men, and gave up his strength to captivity and his beauty into the hand of the adversary. He also gave over his people to the sword and was filled with wrath at his inheritance. Fire devoured his choice men, and his virgins had no wedding songs. His priests fell by the sword, and his widows could not weep. Then the Lord awoke as if from a sleep, as if he were a warrior overcome by wine. He struck his adversaries backward. He put on them an everlasting reproach. He rejected also the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth, which he also founded forever. He also chose David, his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds, from the following the nursing ewes. He brought him to shepherd Jacob, his people, and Israel, his inheritance. So he shepherded them according to the integrity of his heart and led them with his skillful hands. Right, 78 is very much the lesson of the Psalter. It's very much the lesson we're supposed to take away, not to be like that generation that he loathed, that generation that came out of Egypt. A lesson that Israel didn't learn in its history. Right, so the first 53 verses in particular are about that first generation that comes out of Egypt. Right, they saw the plagues, they saw the manna, they saw the quail, they saw water coming from a rock, and yet they didn't believe. I remember someone once saying, like, if the church stood up and did something about, I think it was about AIDS, but if the church stood up and did something about AIDS, it'd be the greatest evangelistic testimony that the church could give to the world. Like, if they don't believe Moses, it doesn't matter. Like, Israel saw 10 plagues. Right? They saw the water turn into blood. They saw the flies, the gnats, the frogs. They saw the light in the darkness. They saw the hail. Remember, it wasn't just hail everywhere. It was like hail on Egypt and hail not on us. Darkness on Egypt, but no darkness like right here. It's right? But it's something that can't be just explained. It's very them, us, something's going on here. They saw the 10 plagues, they saw the Red Sea, and yet they tested him, yet they didn't believe. And they didn't pass this lesson down to their children, right? That second generation is a little better, but then after that, when they take the land, they still don't act, right? Verse 57, but turn back and acted treacherously like their fathers. They turned aside, right? And they go to the high places. And then the Exodus is 1446. David is somewhere around 1,000. So that's the time period that 58 through 64 is talking about, right? That God goes silent for a period there before Samuel. Right? He abandoned Shiloh. Remember, Shiloh is the first place where the tabernacle is. And God's like, I'm out. But then he awakens as if from a sleep, as if a warrior overcome by wine, right? As if he's like a guy who wakes up from a hangover. He's like, oh yeah, now I got to get up and do stuff today. Yeah, so it's like the Lord, because he abandoned Shiloh, and then the Philistines they take over the ark and stuff like that. But then verse 65, then the Lord woke up as if from a sleep. So it's almost like once David and Samuel come on the scene, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, the Lord's back. So it's just that comparison of like when you like when he woke up from a sleep, like, oh man, okay, I'm doing something. Or it's like as if he were a warrior overcome by wine. So it's like a warrior wakes up the next day from the hangover and is a little. All right, here we go. It's just comparing that to the Lord, where all of a sudden he's coming back on the scene, and now his kingdom program. He's setting up a kingdom. He's chosen Zion. He's chosen Judah. He's rejected Joseph. He's rejected Ephraim. Remember, Joseph is. He's the one through whom Jacob tries to pass the double blessing, because he gives the double blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, in one sense, it works out because it keeps the 12 tribes idea, because the Lord takes Levi for himself. So remember, you have the 12 sons. The first two, I can't remember who's the firstborn, but the first two are Simeon and Reuben. They kind of disqualify themselves in Genesis 38. Remember, their sister falls in love with a guy. They don't like the guy. And so they're like, hey, if you want to become part of our family, you got to get circumcised. Your whole wedding party's got to get circumcised. Your second cousin, once removed, has to get circumcised. Everyone's got to get circumcised. And, I mean, A, that guy must have really loved their sister. B, his family must have really loved him because they did it. I'm just saying, your best friend comes up like, hey, I like this girl. I want to marry her, but we all gotta get circumcised. If my friend comes up and does it, I don't like you that much, and I don't like your girlfriend that much. Like, see ya. I ain't doing that. But they all do it. And then as they're recovering, Simeon and Reuben go in and kill them all. Because they don't like them. And so they're very much disqualified from the kingship. So that means the third born is Levi. The Lord takes Levi for himself, and the priesthood will come through Levi. And then the fourth born is Judah. So kingship passes through Judah. The scepter, Genesis 49, 10 through 12, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, the ruling staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And then the winepress and his victory and all that. But Jacob very much tries to do the double blessing with Ephraim and Manasseh, and then he switches the hand. Remember, Ephraim's actually the youngest born, and he's trying to give the double blessing to not just Joseph, but particularly to Ephraim. But God's like, I've rejected Jacob's choice. So in one sense, that's why there's no tribe of Joseph, because there's slightly that rejection, but also getting back to the number 12, because the Lord took Levi. Because you don't have a tribe of Joseph referenced until Revelation 14, or whatever chapter of Revelation that is. because it just references the 12,000 from Levi and then 12,000 from Joseph. What is it? Right, but this is really the lesson, and so it's like this is what he did in the past, right? That he woke up from that slumber in order to establish his kingdom plan. But in the past, he abandoned Shiloh, but then he woke up from a slumber to reestablish his kingdom plan and what he was going to do. And we see this. Let's see. Let me see if I can find the cross reference. It's in Jeremiah. You don't have to turn there if you don't want to. Jeremiah 7. Because when Israel begins to do it again, they go to the high places. They're doing what they did again. Jeremiah chapter 7. The word that came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, "Stand in the gate of the house of Yahweh. You shall call out there this word, and you shall say, Hear the word of Yahweh, all you of Judah, who enter by his gates of worship. Thus says Yahweh of hosts, the God of Israel, Make your ways and your deeds good, and I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust in lying words, saying, This is the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh, the temple of Yahweh. For if you truly make your ways and your deeds good, if you truly do justice between a man and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the sojourner, the orphan, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor walk after other gods to your own evil demise, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave your fathers forever and ever." Verse 8, "Behold, you are trusting in lies to no avail. You will steal. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear while lying, and burn incense to Baal, and walk after other gods that you have not known? Then come stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, We are delivered, that you may do all these abominations? Has this house, which is called by my name, become a robber's den in your sight? Behold, I, even I, have seen it, declares Yahweh. But go to my place, which was in Shiloh, where I made my name dwell at the first, and see what I did to it because of the evil of my people Israel. And now, because you have done all these works, declares Yahweh, and I spoke to you, rising up early and speaking, but you did not hear, and I called to you, but you did not answer. Therefore, I will do to this house, which is called by my name, in which you trust, and to the place which I gave you, your fathers, as I did to Shiloh. I will cast you out of my presence, as I have cast out all your brothers, all the seed of Ephraim. As for you, do not pray for this people, Jeremiah, and do not lift up a cry of lamentation or prayer for them. Do not intercede with me, for I am not hearing you. Are you not seeing what they are doing in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers make the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods in order to provoke me. Do they provoke me? Declares Yahweh. Is it not themselves they provoke to the shame of their own face? Therefore, thus says the Lord Yahweh, Behold, my anger, my wrath will be poured out on this field, on man, on beast, on the trees of the field, and on the fruit of the ground. It will burn and not be quenched. Right, but just this lesson that Israel was supposed to learn from Psalm 78, I mean, even before that, but just the writing of Psalm 78, why it's within that time period. Remember, book 3 is being compiled during the divided kingdom, and they're still supposed to learn this lesson of Shiloh, because he's doing it again, but this time to the temple. Like, God's like, I left Shiloh. You think that you can sacrifice to me and Baal and all the other gods, and I'm okay with it because you come to my temple and like, hey, we're good. We did the sacrifices. And then you can go commit abominations, but then you can come here on Saturday and you're good. Go look at Shiloh. Go look what I did to Shiloh. And so that lesson of Psalm 78, again, it's compiled. We don't know when Book 3 was compiled. I think it's during that divided kingdom period. Obviously, Jeremiah is toward the end of that period, about 600, 580, because of Jerusalem will fall in 586. So even if you say at 600 BC is when that Jeremiah, that lesson is still for that inner divided kingdom period. Learn from Israel when they come out of the land. Learn from Israel when that 400-year period between 1400 and David, when they go to the high places, when they commit idolatry and adultery, and what he did with Shiloh. So the lesson is looking back, but it's also like he's going to do it again. Right? He's going to abandon the temple, as he will do in the book of Ezekiel. But that hope from that in the past, that when he did that to Shiloh, he didn't simply abandon Shiloh. He woke up as one wakes up from a sleep, as a warrior overcome with wine. And then he took action. Then he struck his enemies. Then he established the Davidic king, and he chose Zion. And he chose a king who will shepherd the people out of the integrity of his heart with a skillful hand. And that's the lesson for Israel, the whole history of Israel, and even where we are at today, is that he is going to do 65 through 72 again. And we are waiting for that. Not that he's not active, but just as a lesson, it's that same concept. We're waiting for him to wake up from a sleep when Christ returns, and that kingdom is established, when he takes back Zion, when he establishes his people, when he shepherds them out of the integrity of his heart and his skillful hand, and we have that millennial kingdom come about in that reign of David. So it's what they're looking forward to. It's the lesson they're supposed to learn, but it's the lesson that reverberates through history and also where we are. Because in one sense, we live in book 3, because we're waiting for the kingdom to come about. And we live in a time when we see the prosperity of the wicked and the proud individual. We didn't go through Psalm 73 in much detail, but Psalm 73, he's tempted to be jealous of the wicked. He's tempted to look at their life and be like, why do they have their best life now? But then he's like, if I had voiced my concern, I would have led others astray, because Asaph is a Levite, so he would have led others astray if he voiced that opinion. But then he refocuses and he thinks about his eschatology, and that's what reorients his perspective, because I considered their end. Like, it's their best life now because it's the next one's not. It's definitely not. I don't want to say it's their only life, because they have. We often think, side comment, we often think about the resurrection, particularly with the bodily infirmities and afflictions that we have. We think of the perfected bodily resurrection as our hope, which it is, right? But particularly when it comes to physical ailments, the disabled, when we think of that hope, right? The perfected body. And we think about it from the believer's perspective, that we get a perfect body, which is true. Everyone gets a perfect body. The unbeliever is going to be resurrected one day, and they will get a perfect, pristine body. Because for all of eternity, they will perfectly feel in their body, a resurrected perfect body, they will perfectly feel the wrath of God. And they need a resurrected body so that it will endure the wrath of God forever. Like, the unbeliever gets resurrected. But not to life, but to eternal death. But they have to have a perfect body so that they can feel it forever. The pain and the anguish and the torment. and the heat and the separation, right? That's just a side comment about the resurrection. Like, we often think about it on our side, on the believer side, that we get a perfected body and that hope of the resurrection, particularly when we think of those who we may know or who have physical ailments and whatnot, and we think of that hope, particularly that they have in just the concept of resurrection, but we often don't think about it on the other side, because Matthew 25, everybody gets resurrected. Right. So just more comments about Psalm 78. Right, Israel's history was always meant to function as a theological lesson. Right, Israel was continually unfaithful throughout her history. But on the flip side, Yahweh was always faithful. Right, every generation of believers must learn this lesson. Again, that's why it's applicable, because that's why I say we live in book 3. Right, every generation of believers must learn from Israel's history, a history that must never be repeated. Right, and he remains faithful to the Davidic covenant. Right, we expect, again, especially when we connect verses 60, well, not 65, 60, where he talks about how he abandoned Shiloh, and we connect that to the Jeremiah message, how that idea is repeating. So we expect that repetition of him to awake and to reestablish the Davidic covenant. And Thomas Schreiner writes, "Even after the days of David, therefore, Israel should be full of hope. God will fulfill his promise to shepherd and reign over his people with a new David." Again, 78 very much reflects on that first generation of Israel. Again, there's a little bit about that, the next generation and that period in between, some from 14 to 1000 BC, that 400-year period. But a lot of it, first 53 verses, are primarily about that first generation. Don't be like them. And we see that lesson come up again in something like Psalm 95, right? Where he doesn't let them enter into his rest. Right? He loathed that generation of Israel. They were the worst example, the worst generation spiritually of Israel's history. Turn to Daniel 12. Daniel 12. So remember Daniel 12, one of the writings. Daniel's technically not one of the prophets. He's within the writings, within the Hebrew text. And it's very much a lesson, a book for the nations. And it's kind of interesting because it's illustrated in the fact that chapter 1 is written in Hebrew, chapters 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, and then chapters 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew again. So it's just interesting that the chapters about the nations are all written in the language of the time of the nations, which would be Aramaic. But then the message turns back to a message for Israel, as Daniel will say explicitly, and then he illustrates that fact by writing in Hebrew again. But that's just a side nerd comment. Daniel chapter 12. So, but the latter chapters of Daniel is primarily a message for the nation of Israel, as it says. I just can't remember the verse offhand. It's chapter 8, I think, where it says it explicitly, where it's the message, and again, it's illustrated by the language itself that it's written in. But chapter 12, talking about the end of days, verse 1, "Now at that time Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will stand. And there will be a time of distress such as never happened since there was a nation until that time. And at that time your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to reproach and everlasting contempt. And those who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse of heaven, those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever." Right, so if that first generation of Israel, and if you go back into Exodus and even into Psalm 72, what constantly characterized that group? What did they always do in the wilderness? grumble and complain, murmur and complain. Those two terms are often linked with what that generation, and that's the worst generation. Daniel 12, right, it's the resurrection, it's the end, and that generation of Israel who is resurrected will be like, verse 3, who have insight will shine brightly like the brightness of the expanse in heaven, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So Daniel chapter 12 is very much the best spiritual generation that Israel will have. So murmuring and complaining, it's like characterize the worst generation spiritually Israel had, that generation that came out of the wilderness. Those who shine like the stars in the expanse of heaven, the best generation of what's going on in Daniel chapter 12. Where are we headed? Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 12. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who has at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Then focusing particularly on this next section. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to boast, because I did not run in vain, nor labor in vain. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will be blameless in the midst of a generation among whom you shine as lights. What Old Testament references is Paul making?
Comparing to the generation coming out of the wilderness.
Yep. Don't be like that first generation that came out of the wilderness with grumbling and disputing. But rather, be like that last generation, because then he quotes Daniel chapter 12, among whom you shine as lights.
And the grumbling and complaining is against God, not
Yeah.
against each other.
Right, against God. But Paul is very much applying just the lesson of Psalm 78. Don't be like that first generation of Israel with groaning and complaining, but live as that best generation of Israel that we haven't even seen yet, among a crooked generation whom you shine as lights. Because it's a direct quotation of Daniel chapter 12. So we continue to apply Psalm 78 to our own lives, again, because I think we live very much in book 3, before and expecting that Davidic covenant to be not reestablished, but to be fully realized when Christ comes. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this evening, time to spend in your word, helps to apply it, to learn from it, particularly as we focus in just on Psalm 78, to learn from the history of Israel, to not live as that first generation who saw so much and yet continue to rebel against you. But blessed are those who believe without seeing. Lord, we just pray that we would live as that last generation of Israel, as Daniel 12 talks about, as Paul draws upon, to apply that lesson as we look forward we apply that lesson of Psalm 78 as we look forward to when you awake in that sense and reestablish your kingdom plan. Not that you've abandoned it, but that we see Christ come back on the scene. And we see the glory return. And we see all the glories of your kingdom to come. Lord, let your kingdom come. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Any questions, comments, concerns, screams of outrage?